All right, here we go with some more photo editing. This is file dsc_5610.nef. In looking at this photo for the first time, there's not a lot to do to it, not tons. We're gonna spiffy it up a little bit. But the first thing that really jumps out at me, and I always start with the thing that bothers me the most to make sure that I can fix that. And if I can't fix it somehow, then there's no point in addressing other issues in the image. So the first thing is obviously in the bottom right corner of the image, this sign, this green and lighter green sign is really distractive to the whole image. I'm sure you had no choice, no option other than to cut this sign down. Anyway, I don't know what's on the rest of the sign. So the first thing I'm going to look at is actually cropping to see what could I do, and do I still have an image if I crop most of that out. Because the wings are so wide in this photo, I might look at making it a 16:9 ratio, which I really like. So there we've completely gotten rid of the sign. And just a matter maybe of centering it a little bit and making sure we have an equal amount of space all the way around it. And right here on my cropping tool is the center. And if I drive that right between the bird's eyes and then sort of check on each side of the wings, it's pretty close. Right in there somewhere. And this way the signs completely go. So that's got a lot more impact to me. Still, this in the bottom right hand side, this is a little bit distractive. But I don't really want to crop in any tighter because I like to have this space above the wings. And this platform the bird is on is really cool. So maybe we'll just darken this a little bit, make it a little less obvious because it's like the second or third brightest thing in the image, and your eye always goes to the brightest part, which is on the bird. But then there's also some lines sort of leading over here to this out of focus thing. And I'm definitely old school when it comes to not having something out of focus that's in the foreground. So your subject is here, but this is before the subject, also called the foreground. Haha. I don't like that out of focus because it looks uncomfortable to me. So let's make some preliminary adjustments here, and then we'll come back maybe and darken that a little bit. The white balance, I don't think I would change this white balance much. It looks pretty nice. I like how this wood looks, and I think the bird is probably okay. Now, as you move the cursor around, you start getting values in the top right, and you can kind of tell whether or not something is way out of whack. Or you can choose the white balance eyedropper, and you can look even more closely. So, for example, the numbers at the bottom of this little box that popped up, it's RGB, red, green, blue, and the values are really close to each other. 6.8, 6.6, 6.4, and so that means our white balance is pretty close. Maybe there's just a touch more red, but 0.4, I don't know what those increments actually are. 0.4 more red, it isn't that much. And if we look down here, this is maybe a neutral gray area as well. And there we have about 3 points difference between red and blue. But it doesn't bother me the way this looks, so I'm actually not going to change it. And so the first thing I want to do is bring the shadows up a little bit, because The underneath side of this bird's wings, the feathers are phenomenal. They're so beautiful. And I want to be able to see some of that detail. But then the blacks look a little washed out for a contrasty day, so I'll go over here to the black slider, and I'm holding down the Alt key and sliding this to the left. See where I'm starting to have some totally rich blacks with no detail at the bottom there. And then when I let go, that's what it looks like. There's no detail down here that we care about, so it's fine if that goes black. We don't care about that at all. I'm even going to take the exposure up maybe a third, see what it looks like. So 0.33 would be one third of a stop. That looks pretty awesome. I actually like that. And let's look at our highlights just a little bit here. So I'm over here on the right on the highlight slider and holding down the Alt key. So there's allegedly actually highlights. There's actually detail in these highlights. They're not too blown out, really. It's okay. There's a spot. I don't know if that's the moon back there or if it's something else. But while I'm right here, I'm actually going to take that spot out. In Lightroom, you just hit the keyboard Q, and that brings up the tool that is called spot removal. So I think highlights are fine now. And this isn't looking bad. Okay, let's bring up the clarity a little bit just to add a little detail here. About that. Fumble fingers on the keyboard. Way too much the other way. And that's a good way, you know, that's a good way to tell how much should I do? Well, crank it all the way up or all the way down, and pretty quickly you'll start seeing, you know, at what level you think looks right. I don't want to add too much to this, and I like sort of round number stopping places. A round number of 15. You've got great detail, and your shutter speed was obviously 5,000. So great, good for you. You totally stopped the action of this wing. So it looks great at 5,000th. And in Lightroom, you just press the I key to cycle through that nomenclature that pops up in the top left. And I don't like that. I don't want that in my way. So, all right. So clarity is looking fine. Let's look at vibrance, because I'd like to see. Oh, okay. This is the first time I realized this chick was here. Look at that evil look. That is so impressive. I didn't even notice that until I started cranking up the vibrance a little bit. It just jumped out. These eyes popped out at me. So I'm going to go up about 30. That's looking pretty nice. And then sometimes I will desaturate and then reassess. So maybe cranking up the vibrance even a little bit more. Let's go to 50. Looks pretty nice. Let's see if there's any colors we would like to sort of desaturate. This green right here, you know, it jumps out a little bit. I know in the previous photo I maybe spend a lot of time desaturating that a little bit. We could look at that. I don't know if we can do this globally. The other option is to adjust by dragging in the photo, which is a pretty cool tool. So we're going to zoom in so we can see it, and then come over here to the saturation panel. Click once on that. Then you bring that over here and you pick the thing that you're trying to desaturate. You click once and then you just drag down. Now we also want to see, what else is happening in the rest of the photo. As I drag up and down, which I'm sorry you can't actually see here, but the slider on the right, two of the sliders on the right are moving. As I slide it down, you're also losing the color of some of the lichen in the bottom left of the photo. And I'd actually like to leave that there. So in this case, I'm not going to use this tool because that's the problem with this tool, is that it does a global change, and I don't really want a global change. I just want to lighten this slightly. So I would go back to using a brush and find the saturation. And in this case, the brush is already cranked way up on saturation, and that's a good way to make sure you're selecting the thing that you want to select. And I'm choosing auto mask because I want it to stick with the first color that I click on here. Make a brush about this big, and let's give it a shot here. Okay, so you can see that it's getting really saturated, and that's fine. That's the area that we want to select. In the bottom left, it says Show Selected Mask Overlay, and if I click on that, this is now showing me exactly what is selected. And that looks fine. And then let's take the saturation slider and go to the left just a little bit. And I'd say we're done with that. Now, the explanation took way longer than it really takes to do it once you're used to doing it. So that's what's kind of freaky about it to me, is spending all this time explaining what I'm doing. I think that's fine for HSL and color. Let's go ahead and look at sharpening. And I want to zoom in on this to make sure that I'm not over sharpening. Now, holding down the Alt key gives me a black and white, which Lightroom thinks it's easier to determine if you're sharpening or over sharpening. And I'm just going to go with 60. And then same with radius. So over here, all the way to the right, that's way too much sharpening. If I let go of it, it looks kind of harsh. So let's go back here where it's just starting to show some detail. Maybe 1. Yeah, that looks a lot better. And then let's go to the detail slider. Same thing, holding down the Alt key all the way to the right, starts giving you that reticulation look or grain. And all the way to the left, maybe 1. And masking, same thing, hold the Alt key and start sliding it to the right. On this, what's in white, you're sharpening. What's in black, you are not sharpening. So, we don't need sharpening in the sky. And maybe we just want sharpening around the edge of the bird and in the face, something like that-ish. Now, unfortunately, we do get a little bit of sharpening in the sky, but that's okay. We'll slide down here to noise reduction, which I think you're already familiar with. And you can see that that already has softened up the sky. I usually go around 50. It just depends. But now there's no super detail in the sky, and it's not blotchy looking. If we look up here, it doesn't look blotchy. It looks okay. Getting a little wonky. I just downloaded the most recent version, and I didn't play with it at all before I tried to do this tutorial. So maybe they've changed something. Okay, now, how are we looking? I would actually like to do a little painting here, just for fun. I've gone back to the adjustment brush, and it's already on saturation. And this color on the wing that's in between the gray and the white, I'd kind of like to highlight that a little bit. So I'm going to go with the flow down here, maybe 75%, something like that. And the feathering, I want it to feather out pretty much, so maybe 70-ish. And then I'm just adjusting my brush size a little bit. And I'm just sort of going to paint in around down here. And maybe already that looks like a little bit much. Oh, it's on 100%. Okay, so we can reduce that once we get painted on there. So I'm just looking at the areas of the feathers or other things that have a little bit of color, because I think that's an interesting detail, because the bird is mostly black and white and gray. And then this part, I don't know if these are new feathers or what it is. There's a little more color there. So we want it that saturated. Just want to increase it a little bit more than it was in the original. So maybe, let's say 60 points. Again, I don't know what those values actually are. They just use, 0 to 100. So maybe it doesn't matter. We could bump up the sharpening just a little bit in that area. And another thing that I want to do here, I'm going to get a new brush, and I am going to address the sharpness, and this right here, this thing that's on the bottom right hand corner of the image, I want to reduce the exposure by at least a third, and we'll take the highlights down and maybe the shadows. And let's see, we're on auto mask. Let's take a look and see what this. It's darkening it a little. I want that too much. You can erase by holding down the Alt key. And this allows you to just start erasing. And if you look at what's selected, now I don't want this part. Something like that. I'm going to take off the auto mask because I want to include this. So in this case, auto mask was kind of fighting me a little bit because I wanted to select this whole area. Now we can see that's all selected. I'm deselecting the check mark over here. And now we can determine what changes we want to make to this selected area. And so let's bring the whites down a little bit, maybe. Bring the shadows down a little bit more. Blacks only minimally, because if I bring the blacks down, it's going to make that too contrasty. And if it's way more contrasty than the rest of the scene, it's going to look out of place. I'm sliding the exposure down just a little bit more. So half a stop. Exposure less exposure. And then I want to reduce the sharpness just a little bit. Okay. Now my eye doesn't really jump over there immediately. So that makes me a little happier. I'm done with that. Okay. Now, what else would we do to this image? I think at this point it's kind of up to you. This lichen, I really like it. It adds a lot of, I don't know, interesting place for the bird to be. And If you wanted to, you could saturate that a little bit more. Or if you really wanted to, you could desaturate the wood a little bit more. But it's not distracting as is, I don't think. I think it looks just fine. We could lighten up the eyes, the color of the iris a little bit, and maybe saturate that some more. So I've gone back to my adjustment brush, and I'm going to choose, these are some of my presets here, but I'm just going to go with sharpness. Let's see, I have an iris enhance. Let's try this one. Zoom in anymore. 2 to 1. Okay, and I do want the auto mask this. And I'm just gonna ignore that phone call. Thank you very much. Yes, I hear you. Sorry. I'm doing something. So I'm just selecting the yellow part of the iris there and double checking my selection. Removing auto mask because it didn't get all of that. And it's too much, so I'm hitting the Alt key, making my brush a little bit smaller, and deselecting the area that I do not want to affect. I don't want to touch those black parts. I don't want to go outside of the yellow, really. So something like that. Now I'm unchecking it. Okay. So the highlights are moved up in my preset, which I don't think we need. So we're going to go back this way with the highlight preset. I don't think it needs to be, the shadows need to be brighter. You can also double click on the word shadows or any of these and it will zero it out. And I've got sharpness. I think we need more contrast there. Okay, clarity makes us a little sharper. Now let's look at it from far away to see if it looks wonky. So now these eyes are just a little bit perkier than they were before. They jump out at you just a little bit. While we're at it, we can do these. So there you can see the difference between the left eye and the right eye, sort of like a before and after. This. Okay, I'm turning off the adjustment brush and going back to look at the whole thing. That looks pretty nice. From here, I mean, this is real basic. From here, you'd have to make your own decisions on anything you might want to do. But I think that image looks just fine. I'm sort of going back over my basic adjustments here just to see what I've done. And make sure I don't have anything, you know, really huge numbers. It depends on the file and it depends on the conditions when you made the photograph and other variables. Just how much can you tweak it? You know, if you've got a big RAW file, which we're working with here, you have more room to make tweaks. But if you're working from a JPEG or some smaller file, you know, you couldn't go plus 89 in the shadows. It would just start breaking up. So maybe this side is moving a little bit more than the other side was because there's a little bit of movement here, just a tiny amount. Okay, we need to defringe. Let's see where. Lens corrections. Here we go. Remove chromatic aberration. If you look right in this area right here, there's a little bit of a green-blue tint. That's on the top side. And on the shadow side, there's just a hint of red or magenta. And if we click this, remove chromatic aberration, that usually takes that away. And this is a tiny detail that I think makes a huge difference. It's almost subliminal, and granted, most people are not going to notice it, but I notice it. If I see a photograph somewhere and it has that chromatic aberration, it drives me crazy because it's that easy to fix. And typically on any preset that I have, I usually just include that automatically, because anytime you're shooting any kind of lines out in the sun, by lines I mean, you know, anything like this that's in direct sun, you almost always have that chromatic aberration, even with an expensive lens. So that's usually always a given thing. I'm just looking at this now, and I think some people might want to try to level it a little bit, but I wouldn't, because I like that the bird's right wing is just slightly higher than the bird's left wing over here. It's minimal. And I don't think it's, you know, you don't, nature is not really symmetrical. So I'm not gonna mess with that. And you don't have any choice of the scenario where the bird's landing or anything like that. You just have to be there wherever the bird is, and you get what you can. And I think this looks great. Let's mess with the contrast just for fun. So let's go up with contrast. Go down with contrast. So down here is, you know, it looks horrible. You need some contrast. It's a contrasty day. Your eye wants to see contrast. So I'm actually going to give it just a few, just a little bit. Maybe 3 points of contrast. I think that looks great. And then whatever you might want to do from here would be up to you. So I think that's it.